Yeah.
There you go. Sorry.
Okay. I'm glad I remembered. So, well, anyway, welcome to the Robert Lunz Group August Sierra Club meeting. And we're in person for the first time since COVID. And unfortunately, it rained today, so there weren't a lot of people that were able to make it. So we were really glad that we could bring the meeting to everyone, both in person and online. The Robert Lunz Group, the Sierra Club, represents Colleton, Dorchester, Charleston County, and Berkeley County. We've got over 1,200 members in the local area and 1,000 statewide. And our mission is to explore, enjoy, and protect the planet. So we've got some of our leadership here, myself and Laura Moses is here tonight. Star, he is in the background. He is running the computers for us from home. And then I think Pat is on the line and Nina as well, possibly Ben Mack. Ben is on our local group, but he is also the chapter chair for the state of South Carolina. I want to let everyone know that we've got elections coming up. Both Star and myself are running for re-election, and we have 3 other seats to fill on the executive committee. So if you want to join us, please let us know. All right, we've got some outings coming up. Star, do you want to take that?
So on the 15th of October, we will hike a section of the Palmetto Trail, the Aundal Passage. This is a very pretty section of the Palmetto Trail, relatively short, and we'll hike along the bluffs above the Aundal Creek and enjoy some piney woods along the way. It's a very pleasant way to introduce yourself to the Palmetto Trail, and it's our sort of very own, in our backyard kind of section of the trail. On the 27th, note that that's a Thursday, there's a visit to the Nemours Wildlife Plantation in the Ace Basin. And this is limited to 20 people, and I think I've got 10 or 12 signed up right now. So if you want to go and can go on this Thursday, by all means sign up from the link in the outing section of our website. That should be a real fun thing to do. And then coming up November 4th through the 6th, we'll have a training session for you to become a Sierra Club outings leader yourself, if you should want to do so. You have to be 18 and you have to be a member of the club, and you have to go to one of these training sessions. So this will be a Friday night get together, a Saturday and Sunday, incredibly fun, fascinating training sessions, 1 minute after the other. You'll write home to your family about the wonderful time you had, and then you'll be partly on the way to becoming a Sierra Club outings leader. There's a provisional lead you have to do and some things of that sort. But by all means, if you've ever wanted, if you've dreamt of being an outings leader for the Sierra Club, this is your opportunity to become one.
So thank you, Star. Appreciate that. I wanted to go over a couple of wins for the Sierra Club. So we've got a new chapter coordinator, Audrey Jones. I actually saw her online this evening. And we have a new treasurer, and her name is Terry McLaughlin. And then the chapter lobbyist is signing up again, and that is Denton Linsky, and he will be with us for the next round of politics at the State House. And then the chapter gained 47 members in August, raised over $1,000 in August. And the Robert Lunz Group, we had a great picnic out on Ship Creek. 52 people were there. If you were there, it was a great time. So next time we have a picnic, please join us. August 13th, there was a kayak trip to DeVoe Bank, and it was beautiful. As you can see, these are the pictures of that. We've got kayaking out there. There's a bird list. they saw 16 species and hundreds of birds. So that's, you know, only a partial list that I could get on the screen, but it was a great time. All right, so next month in October, Alec Cooley is going to join us. He is a recycling expert, and he is going to be talking about why recycling is more relevant than ever. So you may have been hearing some negative reports about recycling in the news, but recycling is still very relevant, still very important, and he is going to tell us why. If any of you heard Alec All right. So tonight we have Arielle Gerstein. She is from the Charleston County, and she is the sustainability manager for the Charleston County. She is going to be talking to us tonight about the Charleston County's first greenhouse gas audit. It's very exciting. She did an audit for the whole county plus all these cities, so it's really, really cool. So she moved to Charleston last year from Washington, D.C., where she had worked for the United States EPA in the Office of Water, and she loves hiking, kayaking, and she loves beach. So let's welcome Arielle.
Great, thanks everyone for coming, those of you in person and also on Zoom. Appreciate it. As Christine said, I'm going to be talking about Charleston County's greenhouse gas inventory, and just giving a little overview of what a greenhouse gas inventory is, why it's important, and now that we have one, what are the
You keep going. I'm trying to figure this out.
what are the next steps in terms of what are we going to do with it?
Sorry, I'm gonna have to figure out how to share it.
Just give a minute for the presentation to catch up.
That should be it.
Okay, we go to the next one. All right, thank you. Okay, so what is a greenhouse gas inventory measure? So pretty simple. It's the amount of greenhouse gas emissions in a specific geographic area over a given time frame. I'm going to talk about what geographic area in a given time frame is in this one in upcoming slides. And this inventory measures carbon dioxide equivalent emissions. And if you don't know what that means, I will be explaining that on the next slide. Thank you. So it's a little bit of a confusing term, but essentially why we use carbon dioxide equivalent emissions is because greenhouse gases are not just carbon dioxide, as you can see from this slide. So these are the three that I focus on in the inventory: carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. So in order to compare those to each other, we basically have to convert the amount of the other gases, meaning methane or nitrous oxide, to the equivalent amount of carbon dioxide with the same global warming potential. So the global warming potential essentially measures how much energy the emissions of 1 ton of gas will absorb over a given period of time. Usually, for most measurements, that's about 100 years, relative to the emission of 1 ton of carbon dioxide. So as you can see, the carbon dioxide global warming potential is much lower than the other two gases, and I'll kind of explain why there's such a focus on carbon dioxide in general with greenhouse gas inventories and climate change kind of compared to some of the other gases, even though it's a much lower global warming potential. I also wanted to mention, even though it's not on this slide, fluorinated gases, but I'm mentioning them because although they are not part of this inventory, they have a huge global warming potential. The global warming potential can be in the thousands or tens of thousands. So They're not part of this inventory, but it's kind of important to just remember that they exist and to, they might be included in future inventories. Okay, so this slide kind of goes over more about some of the greenhouse gases. And it's important that we know how long they stay in the atmosphere. So this is one of the reasons that carbon is so focused on. It stays for thousands of years. Methane, and of course, these are approximate estimations, it's not exact thing, went about a decade, and nitrous oxide more than 100 years. As you can see from the pie chart, carbon dioxide is about 80% of the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So that's basically why we focus on it so much, is because it's really a majority of the greenhouse gases, with the methane being 11%, nitrous oxide 7%, fluorinated gases 3%. I think fluorinated gases used to be 2%. They've gone up slightly over the years as fluorinated gases are the only source that is only from human activities. So the other 3, they can come from natural causes, not just human activities. And they can be found in products like refrigerators, aerosol cans, things like that. So just human activities. So just some information about some of the other gases. Carbon dioxide enters the atmosphere primarily through the burning of fossil fuels. It can enter other ways, burning of solid waste. If you burn trees, burning other biologic materials, that's mainly how we get carbon dioxide. Methane, usually most people associate this with landfills, so it's mainly coming from agriculture. And nitrous oxide also is mainly from industry and agriculture. So that just gives you kind of some background as to the greenhouse gases and what's included when we say greenhouse gases. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is just kind of like a very simplified explanation of why we look at greenhouse gases when we're talking about climate change. So I'll probably go over some, I don't know what level this is, maybe middle school science. I have, could refresh everyone. So these gases, with the exception of fluorinated gases, naturally occur in the Earth's atmosphere. So basically, they trap solar radiation, which determines the Earth's climate. So this is the greenhouse effect. This is a naturally occurring process. Where we start talking about climate change is, and as I'm sure all of you know in this call, overwhelming evidence shows that human activities are basically increasing the concentration of these gases, which changes the climate. So it's not really the gases, it's the amount of gases in the atmosphere. So it's intensifying the natural greenhouse effect. Essentially, they're trapping more solar radiation because there's more of them. So it's kind of a simple concept in that the greenhouse effect is just increasing, which increases global average surface temperatures and causes lower atmospheric temperatures to rise. So that is why we look at greenhouse gases in these kinds of inventories. Okay, so I'm just going to go over what's included in the inventory. As Christine mentioned, this one's a little complicated. So did some different things. There's always a time frame. For this one, I chose 2018 and 2020. The reason was I started this work in 2021, so didn't have complete data for that year. I wanted to do 2 years. I thought it would be interesting to kind of look at the start of the pandemic year and if that had an effect at all on the greenhouse gases. Because of course, there's behavioral changes in the buildings we're using and how we're transporting ourselves or not transporting ourselves in most cases. So that's why I picked that time frame. Inventories are always continued. There'll be future inventories, so you'll see future years, and it'll be important to have those to kind of see where we are in the future and if there's any trends. So the trends that I'm going to present, I think it's important to keep in mind that we are only looking at 2 years of data, so it's important that we have future years. So the geography. So because this is a county project, we did the Charleston County as a whole, Charleston County government operations, so anything that the government, that the county buildings, our fleet, things like that. and then all the municipalities in the county geographically located within the county, the cities and towns. The sectors covered are buildings, transportation, waste. Carbon sequestration is in the Charleston County one. I'll talk about that more later. And then fleet and employee commute are included in the government operations. But the main ones are buildings, transportation, waste. Those are the big three in all of the inventories. Okay. So you might be thinking, well, you work for Charleston County and this is a county inventory. Why did you do all of this extra work by looking at all these cities and towns? So the reason that I chose to do it this way is because Charleston County only has jurisdiction over unincorporated areas. So unfortunately, the environment and greenhouse gases don't work like that. They don't just stay in unincorporated areas. Geographic boundaries are not important to the environment in that way. So I did it mainly as an informational way to provide this data to the cities and towns that might not have the capacity to do this on their own, and they can use the data, they can, do whatever they want with the data, but the hope is that we can have future collaboration. As many of you probably know, the city has already produced inventories in the past, the city of Charleston. So the hope is that we can all work together and kind of planning for these issues in the future, and it helps kind of know where we all stand with the emissions.
Is the county, are you doing any kind of metric for how much work the county does during that time frame? So if 5 years from now you're doing all it and there's more or less the same, you're still measuring against the work that gets accomplished, so that if maybe the cities incorporate more areas and they take over more of the work service that's accomplished and the county's work level shrinks, or some other scenario where the amount of work that's getting done, if you've got 18 trucks out right now, 5 years from now you have 34 trucks, your carbon measurements kind of.
Yeah, so I'm just going to repeat. I'm going to repeat the question for people on Zoom. So correct me if I get something wrong. So the question was, are we going to measure, use metrics if in the future the work level for the county versus other jurisdictions within the county change? Like there's a difference in buildings or fleet or things like that. Was that it?
Well, I guess you're kind of answering part of the question. I mean, you're measuring for the whole area. So whether those municipalities change their boundaries or not, you're maybe.
Yeah, so I mean,
that, but
yeah,
if the whole area goes into an economic recession or something, and service levels fall for that reason, I would think you wouldn't want to say, well, we've accomplished some decrease in global warming.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. So and that kind of is, I'll present the data in a minute, but I think that we're kind of seeing that even in this inventory, because I used 2020 as one of the years. So yeah, there's less services because of some outside force and not actually reducing emissions. I mean, that analysis can be done. It's not perfect, of course, because the data that we received from utilities or that we're estimating for transportation, it's hard to fully pinpoint exactly why it was reduced. We can do our best with when we do projects, like if we have a lot more electric vehicles on the road, or we're using renewable energy or things like this, we can evaluate and measure the emissions reduction specifically for those projects. But if an industry leaves Charleston, unless they were measuring their own emissions, and there are some that have to report, to EPA on their emissions, then it would be difficult for individual businesses to kind of say it on that level. But there's something overall that's happening that would definitely be included in the analysis. Hopefully that answers your question. Okay, yeah. All right. So I'm going to keep going. Okay, so this is the key findings. As I mentioned, 2018 to 2020. So this kind of already came up. We saw an 18% decrease in emissions countywide between these 2 years. For the government operations specifically, there was a 3% increase. And for all the municipalities, it varied, but it was also a pretty big decrease, 16 to 35%, depending on the municipality. Looking per capita, so the US average per capita for emissions, and this is 2020 numbers, is 12.98. That's, the per person emissions for everyone in the US. For the county, it was 10.06, so still lower. And I'll talk about why I think we're seeing a decrease a little bit later, but just kind of want to put that out there. So we're seeing a decrease countywide, seeing an increase, a very small increase right now for government operations. All right, so getting back to the sectors. So these were, as I mentioned, the 4 sectors that I looked at for the county. The first one, buildings. So we looked at residential, commercial, and industrial energies, and electricity and natural gas. The data source, we got data from Dominion, Berkeley Electric Cooperative, and Santee Cooper. In addition, for transportation, looked at vehicle miles traveled, fuel type, and for buses, the gallons of fuel used. And the source was Google Environmental Insights Explorer. For the buses, we got CARTA data from the DC COG. For waste data, that came from the county since we have the landfill. So we looked at the tons of waste landfilled and tons of waste composted. And that was directly, as I mentioned, from environmental management. So carbon sequestration, I'll go over a little bit later, like what exactly, a little more detail of why this is important. But basically carbon sequestration is you're absorbing carbon. So you're not emitting, you're taking in carbon, which is a good thing, which is why it's kind of making the graph look strange and showing a negative because it's actually absorbing carbon. So I only looked at this carbon sequestration for greenbelt properties, and I'll talk more about that if you guys don't know what that is later. But they're county, it's a county program. And I use this land emissions and removal navigator, this Lunz tool, which basically estimates emissions or carbon, should say carbon absorption, sequestration from forested land.
Arielle, do you mind if I go into the chat right now? We've got 16 questions, possibly 16 questions in the chat.
Yeah, sure.
And this is a technical, presentation, so
Yeah.
I don't want to
Yeah,
too far.
that's
down the
fine.
road. Okay, let me check this out. Okay. All the questions are about recycling so far. All right, so everyone, if you have a question about the inventory, go ahead and put it on the chat. We will try to get to it during the presentation.
Okay, I'll just keep going.
Yes, keep going.
Okay. Okay, so you could go over. All right, thank you. So this is just showing the emissions by the source. So essentially, as you can see, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide, but the largest sources being the electricity and the gas and diesel, so from buildings and transportation. So it kind of just shows another graphic of this. So not too much more interesting here, but just to kind of show by the source. Okay, so now I'm gonna go kind of sector for each sector. So about 60% of countywide emissions are from buildings. This is the highest percentage. Total building emissions did decrease between 2018 and 2020 by 12%. Something that was interesting in data that Dominion provided to us was that industrial electricity usage, you can kind of see on this graph, decreased by about 50%. And we also had 2019 data, which wasn't included in the inventory, but it dropped between 2018 and 2019. So it wasn't pandemic related. And, to be honest, we kind of looked into it. We're not 100% sure why this decreased. It could be due to business practices, to, something that they were doing to decrease emissions, or maybe some businesses leaving the county, something like that. But so that was like kind of the big interesting thing from this graph is the industrial decrease. The other categories, residential and commercial, are pretty similar between the 2 years. Okay, for transportation, this accounts for the second largest emissions category. It's about 34 to 38, depending on the year. And activities released between 1.4 and 1.9 million metric tons of the carbon dioxide equivalent emissions. So as you can see, and we kind of talked about, there was an overall decrease, so there was a decrease in this category. The analysis I would think would be that, this could be the result of more efficient vehicles on the road, or people staying at home during COVID. It could be some of those factors, and I think it'll be interesting to see future inventories if this trend stays. We see this, continue. Okay, so for waste. So we did look at yard waste and composting. It was so small, you can't even see. I didn't put compost on the graph because you couldn't see it. So focused on the landfill. Waste is a very small part of county emissions, 2 to 3%. It's still important to look at because, as we discussed before, methane has a higher global warming potential, and landfills emit methane. So that's why it's important to look at, but it is a much smaller percent than buildings and transportation. Okay, so I'm going to talk more about carbon sequestration. So essentially, it's a process of capturing and storing atmospheric carbon dioxide. So as I mentioned before, I calculated this from the Greenbelt program. So Charleston County has 160,000 acres of protected land in the Greenbelt program. So not all of this land is forested, but essentially putting a map in this Learn tool that I used, it can identify the forested area and calculate how much carbon is, potentially being captured and stored. There's no difference between 2018 and 2020 for this because the model didn't allow for differences in those years. So I just used the same number, which was about 59,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions where that was being sequestered. Carbon sinks are vital to lowering greenhouse gas emissions. So I think it's an important thing to put in the inventory, and also a positive thing that the county is already doing, that we have all of this forested land. I kind of just wanted to add a little, I guess, global fact that's not part of the county, but the Amazon rainforest is one of the world's largest carbon sinks. And more recently, parts of it are now a source of emissions due to significant deforestation. So that is, something that can happen with forested areas when they are being overly cut down, or if there's fires or things like that, is when, they are a positive for absorbing carbon, but then they can also become where they're emitting. So that's just something to kind of think about, and I think is happening quite a bit. So that. Okay. So I mentioned the COVID-19 pandemic is a possible reason for seeing a decrease in between 2018 and 2020 because of less activities in the buildings and transportation sector. This is the other thing I wanted to mention. So this is 2 pie charts of the energy supply mix in Charleston County. The first one's in 2013 and the second one is in 2020. So the big thing I wanted to point out is if you look at the coal percentage for 2013 was 60%. We're currently, well, I should say in 2020, we're now at 21%. So that's a huge decrease. And as you can see for natural gas, it increased over 20%. So that being said, I do believe that, you know, some of the decrease we're seeing is because of this transition from coal to natural gas. Natural gas emits 50 to 60% less carbon dioxide when combusted in a natural gas power plant than emissions from a typical coal plant. So that is a positive that has been happening as a transition to natural gas away from coal in the energy supply mix. However, it's, you know, I think it remains to be seen in terms of future inventories, but if there's a transition to natural gas and that's the only transition that happens, there's no transition. And there is a transition happening in some regards to the renewables, then you'll probably see the emissions, you know, stop, decrease, and more kind of just stagnate into a flat line, because you won't continue having the transition will have been fully made. So, but I think that that's kind of the big piece in terms of the energy mix is there has been a big transition in the county and for the last less than a decade. Okay, so this is a map of Charleston County. You know, it's kind of strange looking, but that is the map. And all the different colors are the cities and towns within Charleston County. The white part is the unincorporated area. So there's quite a lot of unincorporated area in terms of geography. It's not necessarily where the population is, but land-wise, there's a lot of it. And I mentioned before that I did the municipalities inventory. So it's very similar to the other inventory: buildings, transportation, waste. I did have to weight some of the data for this part of the inventory because for transportation, the Google data that I used only had specific data sets for municipalities over 25,000 people. So it only had data sets for Mount Pleasant, North Charleston, the city of Charleston, and the county. The other ones were weighted by population using the county's data. The same thing for waste. The county doesn't collect based on specific municipalities, so we only had it at the county level, so we had to weight by population. I did receive from the buildings all of the data from Dominion and Berkeley for each municipality for residential, commercial, and industrial. Okay, so the next two slides I'll go over pretty quickly. It's kind of a table that couldn't fit on one slide, so it's the same table. So this just shows all the municipalities. In my inventory, if you want to actually look at the document, there's a page for each municipality, but I'm just going over it high level. So if you remember from the earlier slide, counties per capita emissions is 10.06. So if you look at the per capita emissions, most of the municipalities listed on this slide are over 10.06, so higher than the counties per capita. And if you go to the next slide, these are the municipalities that are mainly lower than the counties per capita. All of them decreased between 2018 and 2020. So that, you know, that's still a decrease, but they're a bit higher than looking at comparing to Charleston County for about half of them. Okay, so this pie chart, excuse me, highlights the cities and towns within Charleston County that have the largest emissions. The 5 largest individual emitters also have the largest population, so this makes sense. City of Charleston, City of North Charleston, Mount Pleasant, also all have industrial energy usage. So I don't think any of this pie chart is probably surprising to anyone. In the all other cities and towns category on the graph, the 7.1, these are all of these combined, or excuse me, each municipality individually accounts for less than 2% emissions. So pretty small. So kind of, you know, areas where most people live, and there's industry. Those are the largest emitters, so not really any surprise there. Okay, I'm going to go over the government-wide inventory, and just to refresh everyone, this is government operations. So we're talking about buildings the county owns, our fleet, landfill, employees, and how we commute to work, things like that. So it's important for Charleston County to evaluate our own emissions because we can more easily make strides in decreasing emissions since we have ownership over these things rather than Charleston County as a whole. And then I'll just mention, as you can see, solid waste is most of this this inventory. The reason for that is because according to the standard inventory protocol, if the municipality doing the inventory owns the landfill and it's in the jurisdiction of that municipality, we have to count it towards our emission. So that's a little bit, I'm just mentioning that because obviously, you know, it's not the Charleston County government where we're not using the landfill just for us, it's all of Charleston County and its residents. But because we own it, it is in our inventory, which skews the data quite a bit, as you can see.
I have a question.
Yes.
Is it possible for you to come up with a separate number for solid waste for just the county?
I don't know, to be honest. I would have to look into it. If they account for it that way, I would guess they probably don't, but yeah, look into it. Okay. But yeah. So, you know, as I mentioned, landfill is the huge one for this, but buildings accounted for about 7 to 8% of total emissions. You know, the county mainly has electricity with a very small percentage of natural gas being used. So I think there's that much else to say about that one. For fleet, it's basically the same story as the buildings. We counted for 7 to 8% of total emissions. Diesel really accounting for highest emissions. And I do have a very small category of jet fuel because the county owns, I think it's like 2 or 3 helicopters for spraying mosquitoes. So, you know, it's not a big part of the inventory, but I did include that. Okay, so the employee commute. So, and I forgot to mention how I got this data. So I did a survey and asked the employees, you know, over a certain period of time for these 2 years, they drive to work every day. What do they drive? What type of gas do they use? So kind of extrapolated that data into the commuting. As I'm sure no one is surprised, majority of the county employees drive because we do have some buildings located downtown. Majority of our buildings are not located downtown or in North Charleston, so not really, you know, that easy to take a bike or take a bus or anything like that. So we're pretty much fully driving. Employee commute is the smallest driver of emissions, makes up 2 to 3% of emissions. And then I will mention between 2018 and 2020, commuting emissions decreased by 45%. We did have remote work for some time, and people were not coming into the office, you know, during the pandemic. And then all of our air travel was canceled after March of 2020, and it's started back up now. But for the whole year, we weren't traveling by plane. I did include flying; it's a very small percentage, but you know, just include where people have conferences and things like that. Okay, so I kind of already talked about this. Solid waste, largest sector here, making up 82 to 83%. So our Beast Ferry landfill, mentioned it's owned by the county, so therefore we're counting it toward our emissions. And emissions increased by 4% between 2018 and 2020. This is likely just due to the growing population of Charleston, just lots of people moving here. Okay, so that's enough about a lot of numbers and the inventory. I'm going to talk about quickly kind of what's next. Like now that we have the baseline greenhouse gas emissions, what is the plan and what are we going to do? Thank you.
And we have a few questions that are relevant to the last part.
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
What about tourism?
So in terms of, I guess, I assume you mean tourists driving around. So the way the Google data works is it's anyone driving on the road, it's counted. So if you were touring and had a car, then that would count. We don't count in terms of flights, although we did do for the employees. So there's different levels of emissions data, but it wouldn't really be accurate to account for everyone coming and going, because that's not really in the county. So we wouldn't count flying, but driving would already be in there, if that's what the person meant by tourism.
Maybe think of cruise ships. For that matter, do you include the shipping that goes in and out of the river?
We did not.
Tourism and shipping possibly could be added.
They could be there. Joy.
Shipping is really difficult. We actually left shipping out of the city study as well, because we were told over and over again, it's almost impossible to get the information from the shipping companies to be able to try to determine how much they're using and things like that. So since we don't know the consumption, you really can't figure that out.
It's also tricky because who would be counting it? Because they're coming from point A somewhere to point B in Charleston or vice versa. So you don't want to overcount things if someone else is counting those emissions.
What about residents flying? Buses all outside.
Yeah. I mean, you could count, I mean, I think it would be probably silly to count flights within the county, because that doesn't really do anything. Yeah, so flying from place to place, it's challenging because it's like, if I fly here to New York, should it be in New York's inventory or here? I think that's the problem. There's ways to do it, but
Seems like if you added in both a little bit, that data could be helpful, but not necessarily.
yeah, no, it's a good question.
If I may,
Yeah, go ahead.
I think it's also about what the county has control over. So, for example, when we did the cities, we always looked at what do we have control over to be able to change. And the county does not have control over the airport to be able to say, what's coming, what's going, or how can we reduce that? That's
Letting me ignore all the flying.
no, we're not. I don't think anyone wants to ignore anything.
You can offset your own
It's-
flag.
I do, but
Okay.
I'm doing.
Yeah, thank you. So Stuart worked extensively on the city's inventories, so he's very familiar with this. So yeah, it's difficult because, as Stuart said, like you want to include all you can, but you have to keep in mind like what emissions we can really reduce, and we'll include everything. There's just some things that we're not, as a government entity, gonna have control over.
So one example, I'll be quiet. So one of the things we did do in our climate action plan, and I don't know if Arielle will do that, is use our bully pulpit to try to get the port to electrify the port. So that's in our plan, because if we can't force them to electrify the port, but if they electrify the port, then all the diesel emission that's happening on the east side of the peninsula could stop.
One question, do you think it's pretty sizable though, the shipping emissions? To me, it would be, but I don't have any basis of it.
I can't really say just because we didn't look at it, so I wouldn't want to say anything false information.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I do know, the only thing I can say about the
Yeah.
port is I know that they have electrified some gantries.
Yes.
Yes, and they are electrifying more things, and they turn the island and the harbor into a wetland. So I mean, they are doing something. So I can say definitively the port is trying to be more sustainable.
Okay, I just have a few more slides. I'm gonna run through, take all the questions. So climate action planning. So for those of you who might not be familiar, the city established the first climate action plan, actually in the state of South Carolina, but for the city of Charleston last year. So that was really exciting. So the county really wants to follow the kind of, I'm just going to say how they did it because it was very successful. So these are kind of the steps that I'm envisioning. I just want to say, first of all, these are not necessarily set in stone, but this is kind of the plan as of now. So we're trying to create a climate action advisory committee. The name might change on that. But right now it has gone through first reading for our county council. And so it has 2 additional readings to go through. And the proposed structure is going to be very similar to the cities where there's going to be a diverse group of people and professional leadership positions that, you know, care about this issue on there for guidance. And then creating sector-specific volunteer work groups. If you haven't received an email from me asking you to sign up, then let me know. So this is where, you know, a lot of the work's going to be done for the plan, thinking about things that should go in the plan. We are hiring a consultant, so we're working through that process to help us. And we need to create emissions reductions goals. The city already has them, so we want to do the same thing for the county. So the idea would be that we have, once we have the reductions goals in the plan, then the plan is going to outline activities that basically these are things we're going to do to meet those goals. And usually for most plans, there's like a shorter term goal, and there's like a very long term in the future goal. So that is kind of the plan for now. And I'll just give a little update on the status. I mentioned that we're going through the ordinance readings with the committee right now, ongoing recruiting for the volunteer work groups. And in terms of the consultant, we did put our best proposal that's closed. So we're going to be evaluating the different consultants to pick the person that's going to work best for us and is most qualified for that. So these are the 4 volunteer work groups. If you help with the cities, these might look very familiar to you: buildings, transportation, waste, and carbon sinks. So these are just basically very much in line with the inventory. They're the same categories. So if you're interested in any of these topics and helping out, we're going to be kind of brainstorming things we can put in the plan in these 4 categories. And I think that is it. So I'm at my question side. Do you guys have any more questions? And I also want to thank Sierra Club for hosting. Thank you so much.
Great job, Arielle. Thank you for coming. I do have a question here from online.
Okay.
How willing were the county employees to participate in the survey?
Well, it was optional, so I mean, we got a pretty good response. I mean, I think all surveys, you know, are not, you're not going to get a huge, like 100% response, but it was enough that we could evaluate the data and look at it, and kind of evaluate their practices. So it was a very quick online survey. So great.
So for additional sequestration numbers, it might be interesting to add the sequestration by salt marsh in the county.
Yeah, that's a good point. I did just talk about forested areas because forested areas really absorb the most amount of carbon, especially very large old trees. But you know, we could potentially add wetlands and things like that in the future. I was very focused on the Greenland properties, but we could definitely expand that in the future for sure. So thank you, I agree.
Another question, is there a gross county product number, something like a gross national product that can show how much the economy dropped?
Yes, I think I did include the GDP for the county, I believe, in the inventory. I think it's in a table. I don't have it in front of me, but look at the inventory.
So it's online?
Yes. The inventory is on the Charleston County website, which I should have put it on here, but if you Google Charleston County greenhouse gas inventory, it should come up.
Maybe Star, if you're listening, maybe you can get that in the chat. It says, seems to me if we grew out the landfill amount, the same amount, let's see, whereas GHG is on. Seems like if you threw out the landfill, the GHG would be much better. I guess is what I'm trying to say.
For the county government operations. Yes, that's absolutely true. I agree. It's just, we're following like standard protocol on how to do these inventories, and according to, there's basically one protocol that you follow for counties and cities. I had an extensive conversation when I saw the number. They were like, you have to include this because it's part of your county. So I agree. I think we can keep that in mind, and obviously there's only so much you can do in terms of diminishing for the landfill.
Well, am I correct that Beach-Berry does not have any gas recovery system in place?
That's right.
It's flared or suspended? Is there any capture?
It's vented.
It's just going.
Yeah.
So that, that makes sense that it should be in the inventory, because that's something the county has direct control over, steps that can be taken to mitigate that.
That is true. Any other questions?
Do you have an idea of what timelines, you mentioned like shorter term, longer term timelines for action plans, like if that's like how far out versus if there'll be any
Yeah.
real shorter term?
So I believe, and maybe Sherry, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the city has 2035 for their shorter one and 2050 for the longer. I can't promise that the county would be on the same, just because I think that'll be up to our advisory committee and the council as to what they want to approve. But generally, as I think it used to be like 2025, and now that we're too close to that, now everyone's doing 2035. And 2050, I think, is the one that you must often see for the long term.
But we also did very short term, 5 years from our plan, because everything is changing so quickly, including, as Arielle talked about, the electricity mix. So we have short-term goals because of everything that's changing.
Most of these plans are also updated. I think the city's on a 5-year
Correct.
update plan. Yeah,
I'm like working with really big corporations doing this sometimes. I found that like if there are timelines even like 2025 and 2030, it's easy to kind of just like naturally we can kind of drag our heels and stuff because it's so challenging
yeah,
and complex.
Yeah.
And so like you end up trying to hit your man, bring it down to like shorter timelines to figure out what you're actually doing versus, checking in like halfway to 2035 on like every 3 to 5 years and realizing, we're not meeting our goals.
So I think what I'll say to that is the whole idea of the plan is it's collaborative with the community. So I don't want to just say this is like what I think is going to happen, but I think that some of the actions will be shorter term, but I guess I was talking more about the goals, the reduction goals, but I think definitely some of the actions will be shorter term and leading up to those goals.
I think one thing that would be interesting, do you know if other counties in the state have done similar inventories?
I don't believe they have.
Probably 3 areas that we're looking last fall, but didn't get anywhere was Spartanburg, Greenville, and Anderson. But and those are the cities, but nobody has moved ahead.
So this is the first county.
Yeah,
Correct, and being
Yeah.
part of the, I think being part of the Conservation Coalition, also being part of the, leading the environmental caucus of the state, I think you get a better idea of something else was happening, but it's not, which is really disheartening.
well, there's definitely other municipalities doing sustainability work and projects. They just don't have a formal climate action plan, or they're not measuring the emissions in that way. But there's definitely work going on. And I'll just say in the Charleston area, the city and the county in particular, we're very collaborative, and we are very interested in trying to do more regional projects because we're supposed to be doing this work together, and it's easier to do together and better. So,
Example is the compost work.
yes, we're working on making that regional as well.
It seems to me that having an action plan in place or developing would maybe help that community to get federal funding from some of the recent legislation. Is that the case either with the city or with the county?
I mean, I
Are you
think,
in a better position, having started on a plan to get grants from the
Possible.
federal
I
government?
think absolutely that, I mean, I don't think it necessarily has to be a climate action plan. I think to apply for any federal funding, you need to have a strong plan. And so if you have work that's outlined in this kind of plan, but there's other places that have sustainability plans or energy plans. And yeah, any type of plan is very helpful if you want to do any larger scale project, get any kind of grant funds.
One more question online. When will the county solarize all its buildings?
Where we what?
When will the county solarize all of its buildings?
I cannot answer that. That's definitely something that, I mean, we're looking into renewables, I'll say, but I cannot fully answer that question.
And then there's another question about, are you measuring residential solar production?
No,
I would have to say yes, if the solar is connected to Dominion's.
I guess that's true. Yes. Okay. I rescind that answer. Yes.
Yeah, so yeah, if your home is, or your business is connected to Dominion, it's in this survey.
Great.
I don't know if anyone's collecting net metering data. That Dominion probably has it, but I don't know if anyone's asked for net metering is what you get the solar homeowner or business gets back if you're putting electricity into the grid. So I don't know who's measuring that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that these inventories are always a work in progress. There's no 100% way to do it right or wrong, and it's very point in time. So if anyone has suggestions or things that they want to see, I'm open to that, and for future inventories, we definitely can explore, other things that can go in it.
I asked a question online specifically about all the plastic and styrofoam and gloves and all the additional COVID-related plastic, again, styrofoam. Was that measured separately?
No, for the inventory, I mean, because we're looking at emissions, so it would just be anything that's going into the landfill or measuring emissions from the landfill. But if you're just talking about like litter, then we really have no way to measure that.
For the county's operations, are you counting the carbon footprint of material being consumed by the county government?
That is not part of the inventory. That would be very challenging. I mean, it's something to look into, but
But it's a huge part that doesn't get left out of the.
Yes, a lot of people asked us that, not a lot, a few people asked us that after we did the city. And we did some research, we found San Francisco, which we would expect, is looking at what's consumed, but it's not manufactured in San Francisco. So the question is, where it's manufactured, is that where the emissions are really happening? Yeah, I know that, but we do have the truck traffic because that's in Arielle's transportation. So we have the truck movement and things like that, but the actual consumption is difficult to look at. So if you got left here tonight and you started to Google that, you'll see that it's convoluted all over. The few people that have even tried to do that.
So there is not an accepted sort of there's not an accepted consensus on where that should be assigned. It's just,
Unless you live in
it goes back to that
yeah.
word.
Unless you live in San Francisco, then you see a measure.
yeah.
Because that to me, that's a huge piece that's missing in terms of what we can affect. When you look at waste and recycling, the benefit from recycling, it's very little to do with whether or not it goes in the hole in the ground. It has to do with whether or not it's displacing the material that's otherwise virgin extraction, and that's all driven by decisions that we can control.
Yeah, I take your point. It's a good point. I think it's, given the life cycle of materials, is very difficult to measure, but I agree it is important. Any other questions? All right, well, we're at 8:01, so I will stop for now. Thanks so much for everyone attending this in person. And I was gonna say I could put my email in the chat if anyone has any questions. So let's any follow up. All right, thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. We really appreciate it, and hope to see you at one of our outings or at our next meeting next month in October. Have a great night.
Thanks.